2020's The Empty Man features a hard-to-decipher twist ending, so what is going on in the finale of his new cult favorite? Below is The Empty Man explained, including the tulpa meaning which drives its bleak but sometimes vague plot. The Empty Man was originally shot in 2017, but shelved for a few years when its distributor was worried about the movie's potentially confusing content. Sure enough, when The Empty Man did arrive in October 2020, where it was dumped with little to no marketing, most reviewers dismissed the intriguing psychological horror as a convoluted yet paradoxically over-familiar facsimile of the Bye Bye Man, PG-13 disappointment Slender Man, and numerous, supposedly, similar genre efforts. However, in the year since its release, the film has been the subject of debate online due to its bizarre, hard-to-follow story. The plot is complex, but according to the movie's defenders, this only adds to the paranoid atmosphere conjured up by The Empty Man, which has been favorably compared to works of David Lynch or John Carpenter. Critics and viewers are now divided over whether the film is an unheralded horror classic or merely a confusing pseudo-philosophical genre outing, prompting many horror fans to check it and decide for themselves. In cult hit The Empty Man, a group of friends goes hiking, whereupon one of them stumbles, quite literally, across a bizarre, misshapen skeleton in a cave. Soon after, all the group's members kill one another thanks to some mind control trickery, leaving only one survivor, Paul. Fast forward over 20 years and a troubled former detective, James, is hot on the trail of a missing girl, Amanda. James tracks down Amanda's friends who point him to the Pontifex Institute, while James sees a slew of references to the eponymous monster along the way and is haunted by the creepy, long-limbed being in his dreams. Eventually, the movie's Shyamalan-style twist reveals that James' investigation has been a long con on the part of the cult. Here's The Empty Man explained in full, with clarification on just how deep the movie actually is and why it's gained such traction since its initially disappointing release. The Empty Man's cult and their goals. Having The Empty Man explained largely starts with the movie's cult, the Pontifex Institute. They reveal their intentions early in The Empty Man and repeatedly throughout the movie, but their plan is strange and existentially loaded enough that most viewers may have trouble deciphering their intentions on first viewing. Essentially, the group is devoted to bringing the titular urban legend to life. Until now, they have been able to use Paul as a vessel ever since the unfortunate hiker accidentally found The Empty Man's body back in the 90s. However, Paul is dying after years of existing as little more than a host for the monster, meaning the Scientology parodying cult needs to make a new conduit for The Empty Man, and quickly. Aware that any new vessel will be just as mortal, and therefore temporary, as poor Paul, the Pontifex Institute started to research tulpas as an alternative, self-renewing way of bringing The Empty Man to life. The cult members do offer all this information to James when he investigates them, but the question of how this works remains a mystery to him. That is because James has no idea what a tulpa is, and even less of a clue that he is one himself. The Empty Man's tulpa meaning explained as if to reaffirm the movie's cult potential and just how legitimately strange the story is. The Empty Man's tulpas have not been seen in much popular fiction outside the third season of Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks tweaked the tulpa concept a little by having them engineered in a lab, but tulpas crop up in many movies and stories. The Empty Man follows the more traditional tulpa route and explains that tulpas are a shared idea that is believed in by so many and with such immense intensity that it transcends imagination and becomes a flesh and blood reality. In layman's terms, if enough people believe a tulpa is real, it will be. The Empty Man himself is an example of this phenomenon. If the Pontifex Institute manages to generate enough belief in the tulpa, it will become physically real, able to influence the world, and can then sustain itself. A comparable cultural institution that may help horror fans make sense of the premise is Freddy Krueger or Candyman, both of whom derived their power from people believing in them. A more recent example of a tulpa is Mr. Babadook, the monster from the Babadook, who is a manifestation of an idea from a kid's book that gets believed in so strongly that it becomes real. However, while viewers aren't unfamiliar with the concept of a tulpa being a villain as outlined above, although, to be pedantic, the other mentioned monsters did exist before people imagined them, The Empty Man goes a step further. The twist ending reveals that its hero is also a tulpa unbeknownst to himself. In The Empty Man, the Pontifex Institute created a tulpa in the form of James to be the new host of The Empty Man, with the 2020 movie's bleak ending showing them devoting all their mental power to creating a tragic but believable backstory that ensured James would accept his role as the monster's human form. This is much more in line with Twin Peaks' use of tulpas, many of whom also have no idea that they are not human. The Empty Man ending explained, the eerie final scene of The Empty Man may be the movie's most confusing, but the events all add up once explained. First, James finally finds Amanda in a hospital, only to discover she faked her disappearance as part of the Pontifex Institute's grand plan. She notes the Empty Man has invaded James' thoughts, describing his presence as an itch on the brain, and tells him to accept his fate. This fate, Amanda reveals, is for James to replace Paul as the Empty Man's vessel. The villain reveals that James exists as a tulpa, a figment of the collective imagination of the cult. While this seems reminiscent of Bruce Willis being dead in The Sixth Sense, the twist of James in The Empty Man being not quite human isn't obvious upon rewatching. However, viewers have seen James interact with all manner of people and watched him sit at home alone in plenty of scenes while thinking back on his tragic life. Was all that imaginary, too? Yes and no is the simplest answer. When Amanda reveals the truth to James, he calls her mother Nora who hired him, and although she is a real person, she's never heard of James. He is then transported to his home, and although it is a real house, it's empty and uninhabited. At this point, it becomes clear some of James' interactions with other characters were real, but others were part of the backstory invented for him. In classic Lovecraftian horror fashion, this revelation is too much for James, who voluntarily accepts the murky figure of the Empty Man into his body once he learns his true purpose. In the closing shots, James shoots the ailing Paul in the head, having replaced him as the eponymous creature's human host, and the hospital staff around him bow, thus proving that the cult's influence spreads further than the members seen earlier in the Pontifex Institute. That's how The Empty Man ends, with the hero discovering he never existed outside his connection to the titular monster and willingly becoming its human host. The Empty Man director wanted the ending bleak part of the reason The Empty Man is a little confusing in a way that leaves a bleak aftertaste is easily explained. It's deliberate. Director David Pryor, who is currently involved with Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, wanted to create a movie that sticks with audiences, and one of the best ways to do this in horror is with a dark, chilling ending that raises questions which viewers get the sense they don't necessarily want the answers to. When asked about the ending in an interview, via Thrillist, writer and director Pryor was keen to share his thoughts on the ending, which was always in his The Empty Man vision. "I like movies that reward deeper analysis," Pryor explained. "I think they absolutely must, and I'm not saying I achieved this, but the goal is it works on one level as an evening out at the movies, you have a good time, hopefully you like it, and that's it. But if you want to scratch the surface a bit, it rewards that searching in various different ways and at various different levels." In the same interview, Pryor also revealed how the ending of The Empty Man was always part of the plan when he set out to make the movie. "The overall feeling was always there," he elaborated, finding himself back in the hospital, shooting Paul, recreating the logo of the Pontifex Institute on the back wall, and then turning around and seeing the hospital staff bow down to him was always the ending from the moment I pitched it. Pryor clearly understands the cosmic horror subgenre, which works best when filled with mystery, intrigue, and a little confusion. He cites H.P. Lovecraft as an influence, and the fact The Empty Man has gained such a cult following, pun unintended, proves that Pryor has nailed how to evoke the incredibly specific kind of terror that successful cosmic horror movies like the Lovecraft adaptation Color Out of Space generate. There's no news on a sequel to The Empty Man yet, but if it does have Pryor at the helm again, it will almost certainly leave audiences just as unsettled yet intrigued as the first installment.